I'm Harold Eberle. This is a lesson in a series on understanding God as Father and ourselves as children of God. I wrote the book entitled Father, Son, Theology. It's a book in helping Christians understand God as Father and ourselves as children of God. When most Christians hear that, they would fully agree with that indeed God is our Father and we are children of God. And yet there are things that are fundamental to Western Christianity that are hindering us from fully understanding and embracing God as Father. We're going to be explaining in this series those issues and how we can correct our ways of thinking to a more biblical view. And this session, we're going to be addressing God and his relationship to time. God and time. I'm going to be using the whiteboard here to diagram some thoughts, hopefully making things more understandable. But the things that I'll be teaching in this session are in the book Father, Son, Theology. Some people learn more by listening to teachings, others by reading, but I hope that you put some thought into these issues, and I hope I can help you think through the critical points of this topic more easily, more clearly, comprehensively. So, I need to start by saying, why is this important? Why is it important that we even talk about God and time? The reason is because all of Western Christianity has been founded on a Western worldview. And within that Western worldview, there's a concept of God and time. It was laid down by the philosophers between the years 500 and 300 BC, before Christ. Leaders like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, philosophers. We'll be talking some about them, how they contributed to Western thought. On the whiteboard up here, I've drawn a timeline across the middle here. I have the year 0 here, and then a cross representing where Jesus died. And then we have the year 500, 1000, 1500, and 2000, and on into the future. I want to explain the development of Western Christianity below this line. Then I'm going to come up here and explain Hebraic biblical thought, how Christianity would be different if it was built on the biblical foundation. Now, most Christians might be offended right now because they claim that their Christianity is built on the biblical foundation. Well, I hope I can show you differently that indeed many of our thoughts in the Western world have been profoundly influenced by Western thought. So I'm going to be explaining that. The reason we settle this issue is because the implications permeate all areas of theology. All areas, how we understand the nature of God, how we understand his involvement with this world, how we understand the nature of humanity, how we understand sin, suffering, evil in the earth. They influence salvation, how we understand the death of Jesus on the cross. They influence how we understand the church, how we understand the kingdom of God, how we understand our eschatology, understanding the future, how we understand the nature of God in the sense of the Trinity. They influence how we understand the ongoing Christian life. Indeed, all those subjects are addressed in the book Father, Son, Theology. Volume 1 discusses the nature of God. There is part of this discussion we're talking today in Volume 1 when we talk about time. But also in Volume 3, in the nature of creation, there's a portion in the book that discusses God and time. I'm going to try to put these areas of thought here on the whiteboard so you and I, we can communicate, come to a better understanding. And I hope it'll challenge you, but inspire you to move beyond Western Christianity and consider Christianity from a more biblical, Hebraic worldview. Okay, so here's this timeline again. Below this timeline, I'm going to put the development of Western thought, Western Christianity. Above it, we'll be talking about the biblical Hebraic thought, how it is different than what most of my viewers, myself included, have been raised in Western Christianity. We understand that Jesus came into a Hebraic world. The culture was a Hebrew culture. He died in Jerusalem, just outside of Jerusalem, resurrected. He was of the Hebrew people, came to the Jews first. Then after Jesus died and resurrected, for a time the apostles of Jesus shared with the Jewish people, but then after just a few years, because of persecution and because of evangelism, they came out of Israel and they came into the Greco-Roman world. Surrounding Israel 2,000 years ago is the Greco-Roman world. Let me explain that. We come back in time before Jesus. We have a period in which the Greek people dominated the area around the Mediterranean Sea, beginning with Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great went through that region all the way over to Persia, throughout the Middle East there, around the Mediterranean Sea, and he conquered people, but he believed he could only control people if he destroyed their culture, their knowledge of the history. So when he came through with his soldiers, they destroyed the cultures of the people already there. They did everything they could to wipe out statues, art, writings. They wanted to purge that area of the world and establish Greek culture. This was called the Hellenization of society. This is the foundation of where Western society is based. When we talk about European society, North American society, the very foundation is being laid here in Greek thought. Of course, there were many people, several thousand years before this, who were developing thought, but it was such a transition when Alexander the Great purged this region and then imposed Greek culture that it was enough to turn Western civilization down a different course. The imposition of the Greek language, the imposition of ways of thinking of the Greek people. After the Greek Empire comes the Roman Empire. Of course, the Roman Empire dominated when Jesus came into the earth, around the Mediterranean Sea. So when we say Greco-Roman world, we're talking about the Greek Empire, then it was displaced by the Roman Empire. But when the Roman Empire came around, they wanted to keep Greek culture. Rome was primarily interested in controlling government. They didn't care what your culture was as long as you were submissive to the leadership in Rome, to the empire. So it's a Greco-Roman world, a Greek culture with a Roman rule. That's the world in which Jesus came. He came into Israel, one little area within the Roman Empire, and there was a Hebrew culture there. But as soon as you come outside of Israel, you're coming face to face with a Greco-Roman world. That's where I have these arrows coming out of Israel through evangelism, through persecution. Early Christians are leaving the home base, Israel, and now coming out into the world. They're sharing the gospel. They're spreading the message of Jesus Christ. Well, at that time then, we have Christianity merging in thought with the Greco-Roman world. We have this thoughts developing then throughout Europe. You can carry it up into Europe for 2,000 years or for 1,500 years, thoughts developing in Western Christianity. But what we today have, we have inherited in the Western world a Western form of Christianity, a merger of the two. That Christianity came into this Greco-Roman world and it was trying to be understood by these people. Whether we realize it or not, and it's easy to see today, now that we have studied it thoroughly, many writers have written about this, we have now been handed in the Western world this form of Christianity profoundly influenced by first Greek thought, then Roman thought. Now, I want to break this down, each of these steps to show us, because again, we have to see where we came from to understand how our thoughts developed, especially our understanding of time. And then we're going to jump back to the Bible up here and show you how you would think differently had we not been influenced in Western society by the Greco-Roman world. Okay, again, about 500, 300 years before Jesus, we have these philosophers, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. Now, there were other philosophers, of course, many other philosophers, but these ones became known and were profoundly influential. Socrates is known for asking questions, having critical thinking. Just everyone around him who was a leader, he would challenge them and say, why do you believe that? Why do you believe that? Why do you believe that? And most people would end up just confused, saying, I guess I've assumed things. I guess I don't know why I believe it. That's exactly what we can do today with critical thinking. We can ask people, why do you believe it? And eventually people will come down to assumptions, things that they have no basis for why they believe. I think you're going to find out today that you and I, in Western Christianity, we have assumed some things. Plato follows in the footsteps of Socrates. But Plato put some thoughts, not just questioning what people think, but questioning the nature of God. And at the foundation of Plato's thoughts is a concept that there's a spiritual realm, and it's best to think of his spiritual realm as a realm of ideals, forms, perfection. So I'm going to draw here a cloud, because he saw this spiritual world like a realm of ideas, perfect ideas, and it exists up there. It exists above us. And everything in the natural world, and I'm going to draw the natural world down below here, this is what we would call creation. It's a reflection. It is simply a shadow of the real, which is in the spiritual realm. A real easy, quick, simplistic summary of Plato's thoughts. There is a spiritual world that's made up of perfect ideals up there, and down here we live in this natural world. This natural world is not near as perfect as that world up there. But there is this world, and then there's the natural world. Spiritual world and natural world. Now, Plato didn't come and just, build out of nothing. There was thousands of years preceding him. And then now following Plato is Aristotle. Sometimes people, when they read history, they'll read how profound Plato influenced, and they think, well, he was the first free thinker. But that's not true. He wasn't a free thinker. Everybody builds on the preceding people who've gone before him. And what we understand is that the foundation of thoughts is often a mythology. Mythology being a set of stories that have been handed from generation to generation, and people build their system of thought upon this. Their mythology leads to a cosmology. Cosmology is how the world came into being. How do you understand the basic nature of the world, of creation? Cosmology, cosmos being the world, your understanding of the world. Mythology leads to our cosmology, how we understand the world, which leads to our worldview. And it was true of Plato just as it's true of everyone on earth. There's usually a set of stories in a culture. These are handed generation to generation. Here, in ancient Greek thought, there was primarily the mythology of the Iliad and Odyssey, written by Homer. There were other stories, but these were profoundly influential to that culture. But they had many gods. They had Zeus and Poseidon, they had Mars and Venus, and Romans had the same gods, most of them with different names, but they kept these gods. So there's a history, long history of believing in many gods. Along comes Plato and he questions, are all those really gods true? Could there be that many gods? And he dismisses all that and says, we don't know if those gods even exist. He says, one thing we do know is that there has to be a real God, mystical, spiritual, in this realm of thoughts, something responsible for everything else. So he develops this concept using his logic, not because God appeared to him or explained to him, nor did he read the Bible, but he develops this concept from his logic that there has to be this God who's responsible for everything up there. But notice his God is not a personal God like the Bible. It is just the whole realm of perfection, this mystical cloud. That's really a huge transition in Western thought because it changes polytheism, a belief in many gods, to monotheism. Again, preceding Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, there's thousands of years of mythology, people handing stories off one to another. Then along comes Plato. He challenges that. His thoughts don't immediately permeate Greek society, of course not, but the intellectuals begin listening to Plato and similar ideas. It's the intellectuals who start gradually coming out of polytheism into monotheism and embracing this God, not a personal God, but a realm of perfection that they would label God. Okay, so we've come up to Plato, and then we follow Aristotle. Aristotle, being a disciple of Plato, takes us another step. But primarily this God, he would see a little bit more concrete, that indeed there's a spiritual world and a natural world. So here I am drawing the spiritual realm up here and the natural world down here. Aristotle, seeing these two, spiritual and natural, and the reason we must see the spiritual for Aristotle a little bit more clear is because he's talking more about God, not just as a spiritual, vague ideas of perfection up there, like a cloud, mystical things. He is seeing that the God who dwells in the spiritual world is the immovable mover. If he created this natural world, he pushed it all into existence, he must be so big, nothing could move him, yet he moves everything. He was the ultimate pusher, the mover, the immovable mover, stationary, solid. That's where he is. Okay, so we kind of gradually lose Plato's concept and develop more of a concept of a God who is in the spiritual realm pushing everything into existence. Now, one more important element, vital in this development of understanding. Way back before these three philosophers, there was already a concept of time, and people thought of time as cyclic. So I draw some little circles right here, cyclic. Now, this was common for every people group whose culture developed close to nature. Even today it is. People who live out in nature, separated from modern society, they're much more aware of the cycles of time. The sun rises and sets each day. The moon repeats its pattern. Here in the earth, there's rainy seasons, dry seasons. There's different seasons like spring, summer, autumn, winter in some parts of the world. Same thing with families. They grow up, they die, new generation. Because of this, people think in cyclic patterns who are closely tied to nature. They think everything repeats itself over and over. The Greeks and Romans actually believed that kingdoms come and go. They never believed that their kingdom would be forever. They thought kingdoms come and go, it's just the cyclic of time. This was laid down historically way back in time when people have that tie to nature. Same thing today. Like we had worked missionary work for a few years in the Philippines, and we worked in a very remote area where at first they didn't have a lot of contact with the civilized world. People being very cyclic, thinking everything repeats itself, they were incapable of thinking long range into the future. One good example is they had roads that were terrible going back into these jungles, and I used to complain a lot, how come we have to spend an entire day just to get to where we're going, because the roads were so bad. One year though, the government of the Philippines brought in heavy earth moving equipment, brought it down to that area of the Philippines, and I was pretty excited being a missionary coming into that area thinking, oh, our roads are finally going to be smoothed out. But I came back, it was about a year later, and nothing had happened. The big earth-moving equipment is still there. I'm trying to understand, and in questioning, I learned something profound. He says, well, these people have cyclic time. The people who live in this area, they've always thought of things recurring. Therefore, they cannot think in the future. So if we hire someone to put them on an earth-moving equipment, it takes us a day to train him. But then when we pay them, they will not come back, because if we pay them once, they have enough money to live for a week. And now that they have enough money for a week, they have no reason to come back to work the second day. Now, that's just an example of how cyclic time, a consciousness of cyclic time, makes you think. People could not think long range. It's not until people start having one, for example, is storage of food. Can they start thinking long range? You have to start having bookkeeping where you can keep records of things, writing down things. Those things help you think linear. The Bible was never that way. The Hebraic people, from the very beginning, had a concept of linear time. Genesis chapter 1 starts off, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, day 1, day 2, day 3. Then there's generation begets generation begets generation. God promised to send a Messiah in the future. The Hebrew people had a different mythology, the biblical theology. Now, I hope you're not offended when I use the word mythology to refer to the Bible. Okay, I have come to believe that the Bible is true, that it is a revelation of God. God has inspired the writers of it. But I use the word mythology just so I can compare it to other mythologies of the world. But I have come to believe our mythology, based on the Bible, is true. Not mythology in the sense that it's fake, but it is the set of stories that is to develop our cosmology, which leads to our worldview. Well, the Hebrew people began having a linear concept of time because they built on the book of Genesis, God's Word, God's revelation, where other people groups had cyclic time. Cyclic meaning everything repeats itself. Now, coming up, bringing that concept of cyclic time up to the time of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, people are thinking time is a trap. Everything repeats itself. There is no long-range hope. Therefore, when Plato's thinking about this, he is thinking, well, if time is a trap, God, this spiritual realm of perfection, must not be limited to time. He concludes that this spiritual realm must be timeless. Timeless. Now, it was Aristotle who first uses the word timeless, but Plato is already associating it with the spiritual world, the concept of the spiritual world, that this world up here is timeless. Therefore, whoever this God is, this immovable mover, he must be timeless. Now, it's important to know where this thought came from. That's why I've spent this time developing, because it still lies at the foundation of Western Christianity. Here we are, up beyond the year 2000, quite a ways beyond the year 2000. Most Christians still believe God is timeless. That thought did not come from the Bible, which I'm going to show you. It came from a mythology in ancient Greek thought, and before the Greeks there was other cultures tied to nature. Then the conclusion that time is a trap, time is destructive. Then they said, if God, or this spiritual world, is a realm of perfection, it must not be limited to time. Therefore, God must be timeless. There's the development of thought. This thought developed before Jesus came into the world. This was the world into which Christianity emerges out of Israel and comes each to the Greek and Roman Empire. Again, the vast majority of people are still believing in many gods, but it's the intellectuals who are now starting to teach that there is this one immovable mover, one God. This monotheism is going to become more and more dominant as we continue. Now I'm going to continue showing you the development of this thought, but I want to make sure that you're still with me. One of the clear points of this view is that it's a dualistic worldview, number one, and number two, it perceives of time as destructive, therefore the spiritual world as timeless. When I say dualistic, that's an important point. The word dualism is used differently in different contexts. Here, I'm using the word dualist just to say two contrasting parts, spiritual world and natural world. When the word dualistic is used in theology, it's usually meant contrasting parts in the sense of good and evil. I'm not necessarily using it in the theological term right now. I'm using dualistic as just two contrasting parts. Okay, we could use the word dual carburetors, dual exhaust if you're into cars. Okay, just simply two carburetors, dual carburetors as two, not necessarily in conflict with each other, but dual. Dual exhaust means two exhausts coming out of the car, not necessarily in conflict with each other, but two. That's the most common use of the word dualistic. That's how I'm using it. The Western thought, the foundation, has a dualistic worldview, number one. Number two, it sees time as a trap. Number three, it sees that this perfect world of spirit must be timeless. In contrast, jump back up here to Hebrew thought. If we were to develop our thoughts, our cosmology, what we believe about the world, from the Bible, rather than from what we were handed, we would start in Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, so up here, I want to draw creation as I would, if I was just focused on developing from the Bible, trying not to be influenced by my cultural thoughts. Now, of course, I couldn't draw it like a rectangle because we don't know that the universe is shaped like a rectangle, but I'm just enclosing it in this area as in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Now, notice within this creation are heavens and earth. Okay, down here with the development of Western thought, it continued to be carried through our church fathers, but there was a guy named Augustine who we'll be talking some about around the year 400. His writings take Plato's thoughts, take Aristotle's thoughts another step. He sees the two worlds, and rather than just thinking of this spiritual world as a spiritual world, now this is equated with heaven. I put an H there, and the natural world. So we have this Christian leader named Augustine who sees heaven up there that still God exists in heaven, God is timeless, he is perfect, and then we live down here in this natural world. So the development of thought, we have Christians who at the foundation of their worldview are still Greek and Roman. In fact, Augustine, his family lineage was for over 100 years Roman before Augustine came along. So it's important to know that Augustine, not only did he synchronize Christian thought with Roman thought, that's not exactly what he did. He did synchronize. He took Christianity and tried to put it into, excuse me, my microphone just flipped off here and I don't want to lose you. Not only did Augustine take Christianity and bring it into Roman thought, he didn't just synchronize, bring the two together. It's important that it was deeper involved than that. He was Roman. For over 100 years, his forefathers were Roman. Educated, trained. He thought like a Roman with a great culture preceding him. Then Christianity is introduced to him. He didn't start out Christian and then bring Roman thought into Christianity. His mother was a Christian, but her family had been Roman also. They were not Christians bringing Roman thought into it. They were Greco-Roman people who embraced Christianity. They were bringing Christianity into the very foundation that was already laid by Roman thought. Okay, so up here again with Hebraic thought. If you are not influenced by Western thought, if you just have the Bible, and you are saying, no, I have embraced the mythology of the Bible, again, not using the word mythology in a negative sense, the stories of the Bible is true. I've come to believe that this is truth. You focus and say, now, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Notice heavens and the earth. Part of creation is the heavens. Down here, Augustine already has the heavens as an uncreated part where God exists, but then God created the natural realm. But the Bible starts off saying, no, God created the heavens, plural, and the earth. We need to understand that from the very beginning, God's creation includes the heavens. And a good way to think of this is to envision a spiritual realm back here and a natural realm in front of it. Like the natural realm is superimposed upon the spiritual realm. But they all exist within creation, heavens. And not only is there one heavens, but heaven is plural. If you were to develop your cosmology on the Bible, you would come to understand that indeed there's a first heavens, a second heavens, and a third heavens. Now I've tried to draw three planes here. The natural realm being the first plane, the second plane being the second heavens, and the third plane being the third heavens. Because scripturally there is a first heavens, second heavens, and third heavens. Try to identify them. Natural realm is the first plane. I will draw an earth right here. In biblical thought, the first heavens is everything in the natural realm that you and I see above us. First heavens includes the clouds, the stars, the planets, everything above. That's the first heavens. That is within the natural realm. So I draw everything above the earth, first heavens. The third heavens is this plane in the back. It is the realm of God. We know the third heavens is the realm of God because Paul talks in 2 Corinthians about he was taken up into the third heavens, into the throne room of God. So the realm of God, but in between the third heavens and the first heavens is a second heavens. The second heavens is a spiritual world between God's throne room and earth, between God's throne room and the natural realm, where angels and demons interact. Paul writes about how God has created all things, even thrones and dominions in the natural and in the spiritual realm. Colossians chapter 1. Yes, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, to bring this together into one package, rather than seeing three planes, it's more accurate then to see it all as within one package. So I'm drawing this box, this rectangular box, to try show you that God created the heavens and the earth. the heavens are part of creation. This is the foundation of biblical thought. Down here, Western thought. If you've been raised in the Western world, you have been raised at the foundation thinking heaven is up there, it's uncreated. That's where God dwells. It's a world of perfection, a world that's timeless. Down here is the natural realm where you and I live. This is a philosophical development. It came from Western philosophy. In the time of our church fathers, they were trying to understand Christianity through this worldview. In particular, Augustine is the one most known for causing Christianity to be brought into the Greco-Roman thought. And what comes out of it? An understanding of heaven versus down here, the natural realm. They are distant. In fact, these two realms in Western philosophy and theology are so far from each other, they can never really have contact with one another. Plato saw the distance between the two as infinite, that the distance between the spiritual world and the natural world are infinite. Now notice, the spiritual world and the natural world. Up here with Hebraic thought, they're not considered separate worlds. If you were just going to believe the Bible, you would say, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. Okay? God's creation includes the world. Within that world, there are spiritual realms and natural realms. The spiritual realm is not called a spiritual world. If you're developing your biblical thought, foundation of your thought from the Bible, you wouldn't even say there is a spiritual world. You will say there's a spiritual realm and a natural realm, all within creation. The Bible teaches us there's only one world. Within that one world, there's heavens and earth. The foundation of Western thought, there's two different worlds. And these worlds are infinitely separated from each other. Up here, with biblical thought, there's one world. Within that one world are the heavens and the earth. Now, we have the natural heavens that you see above you. The second heavens, the spiritual realm between the natural and the third heavens, which is the throne of God. The throne of God being where God himself dwells. The next thing that's important to add to this picture is in Genesis chapter 1, we're trying now up here to develop a biblical cosmology using the true mythology that is actually truth. And we say, then the Spirit of God is moving over the surface of the waters. Next thing we see is that God's Spirit is moving over the surface of the waters. That word moving can also be interpreted hovering, dwelling over. Now that, if you begin your theology where the Bible begins its theology, the entire rest of the book of the Bible will be altered from what Western Christians have thought. God enters, at least by his Spirit, into creation. And his Spirit has the ability to be in one location, hovering, moving over the surface of the waters. The Spirit. Now that concept of the Spirit being in a certain location at a certain time is consistent throughout the Bible. God sends his Holy Spirit in the world. After Jesus dies, ascends into heaven, then the Son sends the Spirit. The Spirit comes upon certain people. That concept that the Spirit of God can be in a certain place at a certain time shows God's Spirit related to time. See, if God's Spirit came into this world and it was timeless, well, if it entered this world, it would immediately flood time. It would be equally distributed. If its nature was timeless, in the sense that it entered into creation, God's Spirit would flood time. Therefore, it could not be in a certain place at a certain time. No, the revelation of God's Spirit within the Bible shows his Spirit coming in at certain times, being in certain places. Meaning that God's Spirit can limit itself in space and time within creation. Not only God's Spirit, but God himself. The Bible talks about God walking in the cool of the evening. God can take on a form that walks. But even think about God's voice. When Jesus was water baptized, a voice came over him. When Jesus was transfigured on the mountain, a voice came out. If God's voice came into creation in a timeless fashion, his voice would flood the past, present, and future. It would immediately fill the past, present, and future, so that the voice would be at the exact same volume throughout all of the universe forever, eternity past, eternity future. If God's voice came into creation in a timeless fashion, it would immediately, boom, fill past, present, future. It would be the exact same volume. You'd still be able to hear that exact same voice today at the same volume it was heard 2,000 years ago when Jesus was water baptized. What is it? Well, the revelation of God in the Bible shows that within creation, God limits himself to time. Within creation, God limits himself. He is temporal within creation. Now, what we're seeing here, versus what's seen here, these points are going to send Christianity down one way and another way. This way develops Western Christianity. This way develops biblical Christianity. What I hope to show you is that biblical Christianity leads you to understand God as a father and yourselves as a child of God. Western Christianity leads you to believe God is a judge, a dictator, and we are slaves, robots with no free will. That's ultimately what this is all going to lead to. Right now we're laying the foundation. Now you might be someone who has to jump into the implications right ahead. Many people don't want to take the time to develop this foundation they're eager to get into. And again, that's what the book Father, Son deals with. The first part deals with God's nature. There's another part within the volume of creation, the nature of creation, which deals with time. But other than those two parts, which we're dealing with today, the whole book is about implications. We're not doing implications yet. We're simply talking about your cosmology, which leads to your worldview. Come back down here. The development of Western thought. Okay, the foundation, and anybody who knows history, development of civilization, we know the foundation of Western civilization was laid down by the ancient Greeks and Romans. We are a product of that. If you are raised in Europe, if you are raised in North America, you are a product of the development of this thought. So it develops. Augustine is now defining, taking this Roman thought, which is already his framework of thinking. Now, other cultures have different foundations, different frameworks. Like in China, very foundation of thought is yin and yang, two opposing forces. All of thought develops. There's another culture that really interesting to think about. Primitive tribe that put everything in two categories. The foundation of their thoughts, at the very foundation, is that there are sharp objects and smooth objects. Therefore, because they divide everything into these two categories, a dualistic worldview, sharp objects like a sharp stick, in that same category fits a porcupine, which has sharp spines. In the other category is a rabbit and grass, because they both are soft. Okay, so they put into these two categories everything, all their vocabulary, all their categories of thought. Therefore, if this tribal people that I'm describing now were to learn in language like English, they would have a hard time understanding the word animal. Animal, they would say, well, why are you putting some animals in this category and some of the... They couldn't even understand the word animal because in our English language, we have the word animal as a separate category. They could not understand. The categories of your thoughts are set up by mythology, which leads to cosmology, which leads to your vocabulary. You and I have been talking a certain language, English, our entire life. Every thought is categorized. A good way to think of it is like a Dewey Decimal System, a system that was developed so a librarian can put all the books in order. In one area in the library are certain books on creation, another one that are fiction, let's just say fiction and nonfiction. You put all books in one of those two categories. But then there's categories within those and categories within. The Dewey Decimal System is a way of inserting new information. So anytime someone brings a new book to the library and donates it, the librarian immediately knows where to put it. You and I have a Dewey Decimal System already in our brain. Every culture has a Dewey Decimal System. Every time there's new information, it's slid into the right categories. The foundation of Western thought is there's a heaven and a natural realm. Hebraic thought There's creation, and within creation are the heavens and the earth. Okay? But we're down here in the Western thought. We have been programmed to think this way. When we read the Bible, we think this. A good example, real quick. When Christians say the Lord's Prayer, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. When Christians pray that, they form in their mind a picture. God, you are up in heaven, far away, and we pray for thy kingdom to come, thy will to be done. What comes to the Christian's mind is the kingdom of God is way up there as he's sitting on the throne, and it has to come way down here to earth. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. In the Western Christian's mind, the kingdom is way up there, and we want it to come way down here. Well, erase that. Come up to Hebraic thought, biblical thought, a biblical cosmology. Now you pray, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. Okay, first of all, our Father who art in heaven. Heaven is not way up there. Heaven is within this same realm. Heaven is here. Yes, there's an up element to it, but it's still within creation. Therefore, when we pray, thy kingdom come, thy will be done, the kingdom is not way up there, and we have to have a whole lot of faith to bring it down here. No, Jesus said the kingdom is within you. It's within your midst. It's right here. The kingdom is here. With a biblical worldview, the kingdom is available. It's now. It's the reign of Jesus Christ right here. With a Western worldview, the kingdom is way up there, and we have to bring it down. Same thing with the presence of God. Down here, Christians think we've got to pray for the presence of God to come, pray for the presence of God to come. But with a biblical worldview, the presence of God is right here. Now, I've drawn these creation and Hebraic thought as three planes first. And I don't mean to limit to that. It was just to help our understanding that the natural realm is one plane, second heaven is another plane, third heaven's another plane. I drew it that way, but don't limit your thinking to that. Second heavens may be another dimension. Third heavens may be another dimension. It may be something that we don't understand. But what we do know from the Bible is they're all within creation. Even the throne room of God is within creation. Okay, just to take a moment with that. The third heavens. Paul was taken into the throne room of God. Angels were there around the throne room. Within that throne room, the biblical reports, every biblical report of the throne room of God, shows God acting in time. For example, when Satan comes into the throne room of God in Job chapter 1, they talk, they interact. There's acting in time. God says, now Job, go down. You see, if the throne room of God was timeless, nothing would ever change. Timeless by definition means everything remains perfectly constant. Down here in Western thought, up in heaven, everything is perfectly constant. Nothing ever changes. This is profound because it takes a turn for all of our theology. It determines why Jesus died on the cross. Right here. Okay. Is heaven a timeless world? Is where God dwells a timeless world? Or this throne room. In the throne room, Jesus ascended into heaven, sat down at the right-hand throne of God. That was a change in the throne room of God. All authority, the Father gave it to the Son. That was, Daniel saw the vision of that. And that's what happened after Jesus ascended into heaven. Okay, the heaven of which the Bible is talking is not out here. In fact, the Bible reveals nothing, I put a question mark, reveals nothing outside of creation. What is outside? Before Genesis 1:1, what is out there? What was God like? The Bible says nothing. But Western thought automatically puts in your mind a thought of God's existence outside of creation. Outside of creation, you have an image. If you were raised in the Western world, you have an image of God existing out there before creation, and you already have assumptions. None of those assumptions came from the Bible. The Bible tells us nothing about what's outside of here. All it tells us is what happens within creation. And God may have a throne room outside of creation, we don't know. But the only throne room talked about in the Bible is the throne room within creation. God entered into creation. God entered into creation, and things change within that. Book of Revelations, John is taken up into the throne room of God. He sees the 24 elders casting the crowns, worshiping God. None of that would have been possible if there was not time in the throne room of God. Okay? Yes, there may be a timeless realm out here. We don't know. See, the biblical position, the position that I'm presenting to you and offering to you and hoping that you will seriously consider, is that we have no idea how God exists outside of creation. There's nothing in the Bible that tells us. Down here, Western thought, it assumes that God is timeless outside of creation, that he exists in a different timeless world. And yet now he enters, he intervenes in the natural world from his world out here. But when the Bible describes God, the interactions of God are of him acting in time. He's not acting from outside here. No, God has entered into creation. Jeremiah tells us God fills creation. Where is God now? He's not. We don't know if there's another world out there. The Bible doesn't tell us. We don't know if this exists, a timeless world where God exists. All we know from the Bible is that God fills creation, and the actions of God revealed in the Bible show him acting in time. Okay, now let me come back here. We're continuing to develop this concept of Western thought. Excuse me. Augustine laid the foundation. This cosmology dominates Christianity. It dominates Christianity. It is built, and what it gives rise to is what we call classical theology. Classical theology. Now, the reason it's called classical theology is because it developed during the classical period. Classical period of history is during the Greek and Roman empires. When they ruled around the Mediterranean Sea, that's classical antiquity. That is the period in ancient times called the classical period history. That's when Christian theology was being developed as Greek and Roman people were hearing about Jesus Christ. Classical theology. It's also called classical because it is the dominant thing. We use the word classical in the sense it's the real thing. It's the standard for all of Christianity. Classical theology is the standard. Augustine was profoundly influential. He's considered by Roman Catholicism as the father, one of two main fathers, a father of Catholicism. But when Protestant thought comes along, 1500s, Martin Luther was an Augustinian monk before he took his stand against the Roman Catholic Church. He was trained in the Augustinian thought. John Calvin, when he comes along after Martin Luther, he was trained in Augustinian thought. Martin Luther quotes Augustine in his writings more than any other person. He quotes Augustine. He is building on this foundation. So the Protestant Reformation builds on the exact same concept. Heaven is a timeless realm up there where God dwells. The earth is down here. A dualistic worldview. Okay? And again, dualistic, two-part worldview. But also, where did the concept of timeless? An assumption that time is destructive and evil. Therefore, God must not be limited to time. This realm must be timeless up here. That is carried into classical theology. We could talk about Lutheran theology from Martin Luther and Calvin's theology leading to Reformed theology. But I'm going to in particular talk about Reformed theology. John Calvin is the father of Reformed theology. It takes classical theology. It's built on classical theology. But Martin Luther is a very logical person, and he's trying to be consistent with this concept of God, God being timeless in this world, and apply it to every area of theology. That's what I have done with Father-Son theology. I have started up here and tried to apply it with every area of theology. If this was my cosmology, what would that mean for the atonement, for the nature of the church, for your eschatology? What would that mean for the nature of man? Calvin took this cosmology and used his logical genius to apply to every area of theology, developing Reformed theology. Reformed theology today is considered the big brother of evangelical Christianity. Now, quick definition, evangelical Christianity. It has different meanings in different parts of the world. In much of Europe, evangelical is equivalent to Protestant. There's Catholics and evangelicals. Now there's also Orthodox Christianity, which we're not talking about, and it would be profound if we could have the time to talk about Orthodoxy, but we're just talking about Western Christianity. Within Western Christianity, Catholicism builds on Augustine's thought. John Calvin builds on Augustine thoughts, gives birth in Protestant thought. Predominant Protestant theology is founded in Reformed theology. Reformed theology is the big brother of evangelical Christianity. In the United States, where I live, the word evangelical, it's not applying to all Protestants. It means Christians who believe the Bible's inspired and therefore believe in the born-again experience. Okay, that's a narrower branch. And in particular, it's separating evangelical Christianity from liberal Christians. Liberal Christianity does not take the Bible as literal, does not embrace the miracles in the Bible, does not take it as literally as evangelicals. Evangelicals say the Bible's inspired, therefore we believe in the born-again experience. And it is a dominant force within Christianity. The definition I'm giving you of evangelical includes charismatics and Pentecostals. Okay, they believe the Bible's inspired, and therefore believe in the born-again experience. Now, some places, in some settings, evangelical is separated from charismatic Pentecostal theology, especially in Christian bookstores. Bookstores will have an area of evangelical Christianity and then an area of Pentecostal charismatic theology. Okay, in bookstores, you separate the two. That's popular usage. When we're talking church history, we're talking theology, charismatic Pentecostals are evangelical because the definition of evangelical I'm using is they believe the Bible's inspired, therefore they believe in the born-again experience. Okay, Reformed theology is the big brother. That means the dominant force. Reformed theologians work hard to try to keep all evangelicals tied to their roots, tied into Calvin's way of thinking. There's offshoots of evangelical Christianity. In particular, we would talk about John Wesley and Arminianism. I mean, still being evangelical Christians, but Reformed theologians are so strong, they're always trying to hold people to Calvin's roots. So, another thing that's important at this time, after 1500, we have the development of the scientific revolution. So in secular society, which is profoundly tied into the church at that time in history, we have the scientific revolution. And the scientific revolution builds on Augustinian thought. It sees a spiritual world and a natural world. But what happened in the scientific revolution, mid-1500s, is that they saw the spiritual world, the heaven up here, and they saw the natural realm as down here, but they decided that you can understand the natural realm by observing it with your senses. That your senses give you can smell, taste, touch, you can experiment, you can touch this natural world. Therefore you can know it. But the heavens are up there, you can't know them. Therefore you must blindly accept by faith information of the heavens, where down here is knowledge. In the scientific revolution, late 1500s, early 1600s, the society in Europe was coming to the conclusion that to know anything about that realm is faith, and we're defining faith now as the opposite of knowledge. It's a blind leap. It's to know something without having experiential truth. Faith became redefined. Faith was defined as to accept what you're told, your religious leaders tell you, to make a blind leap. Knowledge was considered down here, and this is the birth of science. As soon as people decided knowledge can be known through your senses, it was the birth of science, where people started understanding we can study it. Because this world functions according to natural laws, we can figure out what those laws are, therefore we can govern this world. We can investigate the human body and come up with medicine. We can investigate agriculture and know that if I put fertilizer in soil, plants will grow. Science has done incredible things for us. It is born right here, the revolution, because people decide the natural world runs according to natural laws. We can study it, we can know it, we can figure it out. But at the same time, they put heaven up there and said, nobody really knows. It's all a leap of faith. Faith was redefined. Back here, with Hebraic thought, Faith, I hope to spend a different lesson on this, is not something up there, but it's the substance of things hoped for. The spiritual world is not way up here, but faith is a change in heart that happens when you have accumulated all the evidence you can. It's not a blind leap. Faith is a change in heart because you have used all your reason, everything you can, and you've arrived at enough evidence to come and say, I must bring my life into alignment with this. Okay, we'll spend more time in another lesson about that. Scientific revolution. It separates the spiritual and natural. But now we have one more important step in the development of theology. A guy named Barth. Okay, Karl Barth. He died just in 1968. Barth was of the Reformed tradition. However, he's known as the father of neo-orthodoxy. He expanded some of John Calvin's thoughts in a way that Calvin would not have approved. Okay, but I'm going to put Barth right here because of his understanding of time. Okay, Barth's still building on classical theology. Classical theology, there's a heaven and there's a natural realm down here. Okay, heaven is timeless. But now, Augustine said something else. He said, you see this natural realm right here? This natural realm is governed by time. I've just drawn a timeline with little segments to represent the natural realm is governed by time. Now I'm going to put this in a circle, represent Augustine sees creation and says it's governed by time, but God exists in a different realm that's not governed by time. He exists in a timeless realm, but all of time stands before God. Augustine takes this way of thinking one more step and says God exists in the eternal now. God exists throughout all the eternity, future and past. He right now exists in it. Therefore, this creation, with all of its time, is encapsulated. That there's a beginning and an end to creation, and there's segments of time. So he now has seen creation as limited in time, but God has all of it appear before him. The future stands before God. The past stands before God. Augustine is the one who takes the thoughts of Plato one more step and sees all of time, God existing eternal now, all of time standing before God. Now, to Christians in the Western world, that makes sense. You and I have been raised with it. It's the foundation of our thoughts. But I want to show you that it's unscientific, it's absurd, and it's unbiblical. Okay, it's easiest to see it. I'll give you one example right here. One of the absurdities of this. You see, if all of time stands before God, and it always has, okay, well, somewhere on this time is you and me. I just drew a picture of me, okay? Okay, I exist on that timeline somewhere. You exist on that timeline somewhere. According to Augustine, all of time has always stood before God. 1 billion years ago, this whole timeline stood before God. Okay, if this whole timeline stood before God, then I stood before God 1 billion years ago. If all time has always stood before God, then 20 billion years ago, I was still standing before God. You see, Augustine wasn't saying God sees visions of us. He was saying we existed always we have existed before God because he's timeless. Augustine has just made an absurd philosophical leap here. Because if all of time always stands before God, that means you and I have always existed. It means 20 billion years ago, if we were standing before God, then we existed 20 billion years ago. It means you and I have existed as long as God has existed. It means that we've existed in this state right here. Okay, not only are we progressing and eventually going to be dumped off into heaven, according to Augustinian thinking, but even after we're dumped into heaven, this time will still be standing before God. How you and I existed today will still be standing before God. We will still exist today 1 billion years, even though there's another me in heaven, this me will still be standing before God. The me tomorrow will still be standing before God. The me in a week will still be standing in front of God. Meaning, I have existed forever. You existed forever as long as God has existed. And there are an infinite number of me's. The me who existed yesterday will stand before God forever. The me who existed 1 second ago is still standing before God. The me who existed half a second ago is still standing before God. As soon as Augustine brought the two worlds and said God is existing eternal now, therefore seen it all, he has now come to an absurd worldview. As long as Plato, back here, he kept the spiritual world and natural world as infinitely separated from one another. He said, yes, there's a spiritual world that's timeless and a natural world. Now, there's nothing illogical about that. It didn't come from the Bible. We have no basis of it, but it's not illogical. As long as you keep an infinite distance between a timeless world and a temporal world, it can be logical. But as soon as you try to put a timeless world and say it's always has before it this temporal world, you've just made an absurd statement. An absurd, to people in logic, means it's wrong, okay? You've just made a stupid fallacy. You've just tried. To see this even more clearly, Karl Barth. Karl Barth takes Augustine's thinking another step. I will erase this so I can draw a little diagram here. Karl Barth, again, just died last century, lived there. He takes Augustine's thinking, Calvin's thinking, and says, yes, the world is governed by time. So I'm trying to draw a capsule, all of creation inside this capsule. And it's all governed by time, so I put a timeline down the middle of it. But Karl Barth says God not only exists in eternal now, but he exists after our creation and before our creation. That creation is encompassed by God's timeless world. Now, you and I, we've erased that. We've accepted it, but very few people have taken the time to consider where this came from or how absurd it is. Okay? You see, Barth has just said God's realm envelops our world. Okay? God's timeless world envelops our world. That's foolish. A timeless world cannot be after or before anything. Timeless by definition means it's impossible to be before or after anything, nor can it be alongside of anything. Timeless by definition means it has nothing to do with time. Karl Barth and Augustine confused timelessness with transcendence. Okay? I'm using the word transcendence now to mean transcends time. It's one thing to say God transcends time. Therefore, if he transcends times, he can live after a temporal period and before a temporal period. He could, if God transcended time, then yes, all of time would stand before him. Transcendent means he's filling all of time. Okay? That's not timeless. No. Augustine, John Calvin, Karl Barth built their theology based on God being timeless. But at times they shift their definition of timeless to be God transcending time. Again, this is absurd. Again, why? Because if the timeless realm encompasses the temporal realm, and it always has, always will, that means you and I have existed as long as God has existed. It means the me who existed yesterday still exists and will always exist. It means the me who exists right now has always existed and will exist. There's an infinite number of me's, there's an infinite number of you's, and we have existed as long as God is. That's what it means. Okay, that's the implication of this thing. It's philosophically absurd. Okay, it's not true. Even biblically, the Bible talks about Jesus was slain before the foundation of the world. Okay, there could be no before if God exists in a timeless realm. See, timeless by definition means nothing can be before. As long as Plato kept the two worlds as infinitely separate, it was logical. But as soon as Augustine said, no, this timeless realm, it stands before the temporal realm and all of it is visible, he has now made a philosophical absurdity. He didn't come to this conclusion from the Bible. He philosophically derived it. He was trying to fit things together from Plato's thought. Calvin and Barth did the same thing. Their cosmology is absurd. Now, not only does Western theology built on this, but even most Western science. And when I say this, scientists are often offended by it, okay? They would say, what? Western science is built on Plato's cosmology. To see this, think of the definition of science. Science, by definition, is the accumulation of information from study of the physical world. Okay? The physical world. And every scientist would agree with that definition. They're proud of it. Yes, we have arrived at truth. I put the natural, an N right there, in the natural world. We've studied it, we analyzed it, we've come up with information. But the vast majority of scientists, they will put God off and say either there is no God, or if he is God outside of creation, then he is timeless. A scientist, and especially physicists have studied the physical world, but in the back of most physicists' mind is that there is a timeless dimension before and after creation. Now, not all physicists see a timeless world out there. Carl Sagan, he's famous for saying, the cosmos is all there is, all there ever will be. He said there is nothing out there. No God, no timeless realm, no nothing. Okay, he was more faithful to the scientific method. Why? Because science is the study of the physical world, the accumulation of information by studying the physical world. Okay, why then, in the back of most scientists' mind, is there a picture of another world beyond creation where God exists? I mean, most, especially atheistic scientists, they will try to block it out, and yet it's still deep within there that there's a timeless realm outside of this temporal creation. Science is the accumulation of information by observation of the physical world. Okay, let me compare that. Reading is the tool I have to understand what's in this Bible. Auto mechanics have a diagnostic computer to tell them what's going on inside of the engine of the car. Okay, science is the tool I have to know what's going on in the physical world. Reading is the tool I have to know what's inside inside of books. Mechanics, diagnostic computers are tools we have to know what's inside the engine of a car. Okay, science, by definition, tells us what is inside the physical world. Okay, that's what it's for. Just like reading is a tool to get you to know what's in a book, science, by definition, is the tool to tell you what's inside. Science, by definition, tells you nothing about what's outside the physical world. Nothing. By definition, it is gathering information gained by studying the physical world. Science, by definition, tells you nothing of what's going on outside of the physical world, by definition. And yet, most Western people, Christians and non-Christians, have a vision that outside of creation, there is no time. Where did they come up with that? They didn't derive that from science. Science, by definition, can only tell you what's going on inside of creation. That's what the definition of science is. Okay, where did they come up with the idea that there's no time outside of creation? It's an assumption. It's an assumption based on mythology. Mythology based with people tied into primitive nature. The Bible doesn't tell you. The Bible gives you absolutely no idea if there's a timeless world outside of creation. Science tells you nothing what exists outside of creation. Philosophy has assumed it, but I'm trying to show you that philosophy that claims this is absurd. To think that a temporal realm constantly stands and is enveloped by a timeless realm is absurd, because a timeless realm cannot be before or after anything. And if this timeless realm is always there, and temporal is standing before God, you and I have existed forever. There's an infinite number of you and me's. That's absurd. There's no biblical evidence of it, no scientific evidence, and the philosophy of that is absurd. Okay? I'm doing my best to get you to abandon the foundation of Western philosophy, which is the foundation of Western theology. classical theology, and in particular, Reformed theology, which has led to, is the big brother of evangelical Christianity. I'm doing my best to get you up here. Now, I've been teaching for quite a while here. I hope at any time you can stop this and you take a break. I don't want to take a break. I want to finish this. But it's very important. Again, the implications hit every area of theology. How you pray, what you believe when God answered your prayer, how you overcome sin. Yeah, right here, the wrong foundation. And in fact, the wrong foundation has led to Western Christianity being a form of godliness that denies the power. There's a Friedrich Nietzsche, a famous philosopher. Right around the year 1900, he's famous for making this statement that Western Christianity is Platonism for the people. Now, you may have never heard of that. Nietzsche was no fan of Christianity, and he was definitely exaggerating when he says Platonism, Plato's thinking, Plato's teaching is Western Christianity. Western Christianity is Platonism for the people. Okay, he was making that observation. Now, most Christians today would just push that aside and say that's foolish. That can't be true. No way. And yet, when he made that statement, university professors in many universities agreed with him. They came into an agreement and dismissed Western Christianity, and that way of thinking has permeated many of our universities. Now, Nietzsche was wrong in making that statement. Christianity is much more than Platonism for the common people. Christianity is the preaching of Jesus Christ. That's the main message of Christianity. Jesus died, resurrected from the grave. Jesus is the Savior of the world. Okay, obviously, Nietzsche was wrong. It's not just Platonism for the people. Christianity has been the most effective communicator of the most profound truth that humanity's ever heard. It's about Jesus Christ. However, when Nietzsche said Platonism, we can't deny that there is a stream, that Platonism has had a profound effect. Plato was not a good person, okay? These philosophers were not good people. Paul in Romans chapter 1 was very clear that people come under delusion, under darkness, when they give themselves over to sexual sin. These philosophers, especially Plato, was known for his sexual exploits of young men and boys. I mean, Paul in Romans chapter 1 is making a strong statement, trying to tell Christians that people who give themselves to sexual perversions will become darkened in their understanding. We should have never allowed Plato to lay the foundation of theology. He never would have qualified as an elder of any church, according to what Paul wrote. We should not let him be an elder of the whole church. I'm suggesting that we abandon this and we try to go back to the Bible. And we try to say, God, I want to know what is important. What is my cosmology? I want to build my theology on accurate cosmology. Therefore, I have to have an accurate view of time. Okay? So, if you've had to take a break, this would be a good place if you haven't taken a break, but I'm going to continue now going on with this, okay? So, I'm trying to leave this. Now let's jump up to here. Let's jump to what would be the more accurate view. Here I've came up with Genesis chapter 1. If you were to read Genesis chapter 1 and develop your cosmology from that, you would see a sequence of time. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. Okay, the creation of days does not mark the beginning of time, any more than when this watch was made. This watch does not create time. It measures time. So also in Genesis chapter 1, day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, these now begin to measure time in increments of 24-hour periods. Now, it may have changed over the course of history. 24-hour periods may have been 26 hours. I don't know. We don't know. But it began to measure time. There's nothing in Genesis chapter 1 that would indicate time began there. The people of Hebraic and Jewish thought, before they came into the Greco-Roman world, did not believe there was a timeless world. They believed in linear time, both into eternity past and eternity future. The guys who wrote the Bible make no reference to timelessness. It's not in here. They believed that the eternity is time going into the past forever and time going into the future forever. Now, the groundbreaking book on this was Oscar Cullman's book, Creation and Time. Like when Paul writes before the creation of the world, God chose us in him. He is mentioned before creation. Okay, Paul had a cosmology that saw a before creation. He had a cosmology that did not see a timeless realm outside of creation. He saw time outside of creation. This is what Oscar Cullman proves in his book. Now, there are a lot of other books coming out today about time and God. Some of my favorite, Hebrew Thought Compared with Greek Thought, Bowman. Another one, God and Time. This compares 4 views of God and time, edited by Gregory Gansel. Here is Time and Eternity by William Craig, giving different understandings of God and time. There's a lot of books being put out, but there's no doubt that the ones who wrote the Bible did not believe timelessness exists outside of creation. There's nothing in the Bible to indicate that. However, they do frequently use terms of things happening before creation, and there can't be a before. In their mind, their cosmology, the cosmology of the Bible writers was time goes into the eternity, is time going in the past forever and time going in the future forever. It's not a timeless realm. The word eternal in the Bible, to the writers, eternal did not mean a timeless realm. Eternal meant forever, future, forever past. That's what the word meant. Down here, Western theologians often equate the word eternal with timelessness. That way of thinking didn't come into Christianity until these Greco-Roman people began trying to understand the Bible. None of the Bible writers had that cosmology. It was rethought, and it produces classical theology, Reformed theology being one stream of that. Up here, what does the Bible say? Outside of creation, we don't know. The Bible tells us nothing. But within creation, God acts in time, and God is within creation. Now, there's a scripture in Revelations 10:6 that is sometimes used to say that eternity is timeless. That realm of eternity outside of creation is timeless. Revelations 10:6, and there will be no more time. Sometimes Christians will quote that verse. But in reality, if you read Revelations 10:6, you will find that it was talking about a judgment that's now going to come upon Jerusalem in Revelation chapter 6 and 7. He's describing that. And he's not saying no longer will time exist. He's saying there will be no more delay. Now is the time for judgment to come. It's like a mother trying to get her child out of bed in the morning because school's about ready to start. And the mother says, you got to get out of bed now. There's no more time. You got to get up. She's not saying time no longer exists. She says you can't wait any longer. That's what Revelations 10:6 is saying. That's why many modern translations, like the New American Standard, translate Revelations 10:6 as no more delay. No longer will God delay the judgment. It's going to come. That's what Revelation was talking about. There is no scripture that says there's a realm where time doesn't exist. That didn't come from the Bible. Nor does it come from science, nor can it come from philosophy. Philosophy proves that it's an absurd thought. Science, take a minute here. Science and the scientific revolution. People have thought about all of time existing, the past existing, the future existing. In fact, our modern mythology, sometimes Christians will respond, do they hold mythology? I'm contrasting that with biblical truth. Yes, our modern mythology is primarily made of movies today, like the movie The Terminator or Back to the Future. Okay, if you saw any of those, people traveled through time. They existed in the present and they went back in time. Okay, that assumes that the past still exists. If you can go back in time, it assumes the past still exists. That's what these movies have done. Okay, there's no scientific evidence that the past still exists. There is no scientific evidence that the future already exists. That is part of the mythology that fits Western society, and it started because of Plato's philosophical thought. Does the past still exist? Does the future art exist? There's no scientific evidence of either. Let's talk about this. Okay, I want to now take this box, and if I could rotate this, and this would represent time, and it's as if I'm taking this and turning it so it's perpendicular to this plane. This plane is creation. There's both the spiritual and natural world in this. I'm going to draw a little person right there. It might be too small for you to see. But now, with a biblical cosmology, you would see creation as existing in the present. This is the present. Present. Time is like a wind. I'm drawing an arrow here with time, and it's like a wind coming on the present. Therefore, time is acting on the present. If you were to develop your cosmology from the Bible, from philosophy, or from science, your cosmology would show that the present is all that exists, but time acts upon the present. You would not see all of time existing as Western thought. You would see the present is all that exists, and yet time flows. In fact, God is the source of all good things. The most beneficial way to think about this is time also is a creation of God. It flows from God. So if I put God here, and God is the creator, time flowing from him. God is the source. Now, I've already made some changes in thought. Down here, time is destructive and partly evil. That's the foundation of Western cosmology. But the Bible doesn't reveal that. In fact, time is good. God created creation, and in Genesis chapter 1, after each day he said, it is good, it is good. That includes time. Time is good. Time is not destructive. Time is good. Therefore, it came from God. Time comes from God. Okay? But time flowing, here is creation. Time flowing, time acts upon creation. And creation then, it functions according to entropy, meaning things deteriorate, things get old, things rust. So even though all things exist in the present, time is acting upon creation. Now, we've got to put into this model this present scientific evidence. Okay, down here, all of creation exists with Western thought, and all of creation throughout time exists. Always existed. Okay, do we have any evidence? I will put the present right at this point. Do we have any evidence that the future art exists or the past art exists? No, we don't. A good example is with particle accelerators. They have tried their hardest to get particles to accelerate to the speed of light. Okay, no matter how fast they've been able to get particles to accelerate close to that speed, they've never been able to get a particle to disappear in the sense that it's gone to the future, gone to the past. Even though they're approaching the speed of light, they have not been able to get it. There is no scientific evidence that it goes somewhere, future or past. There's no scientific evidence that the future art exists or the past art exists. That is a philosophical idea that came from Plato, not science, not the Bible, nor philosophy, logical philosophy. It came from Western philosophy. Up here, yes, God is the creator of time. Time flows from him. All good things flow from God. But now we've got to bring in this idea that time is relative, because we know scientifically that it is relative in the sense that time can move relative to other places, can move at different speeds relative to other places. For example, I drew a little guy right on this plane, and I'm going to draw a second fella here also. We have two men in the present. But now if we put this one guy on a spaceship and send him off to outer space at the speed of light, if we really could travel at the speed of light, he went out there and then came back to Earth. When he came back to Earth, he would be younger relative to the earth-dwelling people, to the people who stayed on Earth during this time. He will not have aged as much. Now this is scientific fact. I mean, all scientists, anybody in sciences knows that time is relative. It can move at different rates. But here's the important point. When the astronaut arrives back on Earth, these people he meets on Earth are still in the same present. Even though time acted upon the astronaut at a different rate than it acted upon the people on Earth, all of them stayed in the present. The guy in the spaceship up there and the guy down here, the people down here, they were all in the present. The present is all that exists as far as science knows, even though time is relative. Another example, not only can we take a person in a spacecraft and put them, if we could accelerate the speed of light, would they experience time differently? But also, relative to people on Earth, but also the closer you are to the center of gravity, in contrast, in relative to a person who's far away from gravity, time will be experienced relative to each other at different rates. And this has been proven. Astronauts that are circulating in a satellite around the Earth, when they go out there for a year, come back to Earth, they will have aged slightly less than people on Earth. This is verified scientific fact. Time is relative. However, when they come back to Earth, they're still in the same present as the Earth-dwelling people. The people in the satellite are always in the present, as are people on Earth in the present. As far as science has proven, all we know is the present is all that exists. But time, like a wind flowing from God, can move at different rates, depending upon how far away from gravity center and how far they are in speed of light, in relation to the speed of light. So if we are going to develop a cosmology based on the Bible and science and logical philosophy, we would come, all we know for sure is the present exists, but time is relative. It can move like the wind flowing from God towards you. Now, I don't offer this as the only possible explanation, but at the present time, this is the logical explanation that can be developed from the Bible and science. This down here, which is what most Western people have, cannot be developed from science, from the Bible, or from logical philosophy. Can't be. What we hold cannot be. The idea that the future already exists and the past already exists cannot be shown from science, the Bible, or from logical philosophy. I'm using logical philosophy. It can with absurd theology, absurd philosophy, but it can't be used otherwise. Okay, so notice I've changed. How come this view ends up being different than this view? Well, the assumptions are wrong. Way back here with Plato, assumption number 1, time is destructive. Number 2, there are two worlds, a spiritual world and a natural world. Number 3, the spiritual world is timeless. These are 3 assumptions, no foundation in biblical, scientific, or philosophical thought. They're assumptions. When we're challenging our concept of God and time, we are not challenging the logical progression of thought. We're challenging the assumptions. False assumptions lead to absurd conclusions. False assumptions lead to absurd theology. We in the Western world have some Platonism mixed in with our theology. What we are trying to do is now take a cosmology that starts in Genesis 1 and read the Bible with that cosmology. What would we conclude? What would we develop? Well, these assumptions are wrong. Time is not destructive and evil. Time is good. Number 2, dualism, 2 worlds. According to the Bible, there are not 2 worlds. We have no evidence of another world. We only have evidence that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. There's nothing else mentioned. Did God need space before he created? We don't know. Did he need time? We don't know. We don't know what's out here. No one knows. It's all assumption. And then third, the assumption down here that the spiritual world is timeless. Well, I've already said we don't know if the spiritual world exists outside of creation. You say, well, didn't God ever exist somewhere? We don't know. We don't know. Perhaps the Big Bang Theory is true. Just presenting it, consider an alternative. The Big Bang Theory is that all things began as a singularity, an infant, compact, dense substance, and then it blew up. Okay, it's possible if the Big Bang theory is true, I'm not saying it is, if it is, perhaps God existed in that singularity and nowhere else. If he existed in that singularity, then he existed within the substance that came into existence. We don't know. There was no space or time according to that theory. But if we just use the Bible, we also see God entered into creation. Nothing is revealed outside. All we know from the Bible is that the heavens and the earth were created, and the revelation of God in the Bible is that he acts in time within creation. Why would God do that? Well, if he's timeless outside of creation, I don't know if he is. Nobody knows. Anybody who says they know is blowing hot air. Okay? If he is timeless, the Bible reveals him as entering into time. Well, perhaps if he did enter into time and become temporal, perhaps it's like a parent coming down on his knee to talk to a child, to get on their level. Perhaps just as the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, God filled creation and is relating to us in time. We really don't know. See, with this concept that I'm trying to show you, that time is not something that the future doesn't exist, the past doesn't exist, but time is something flowing from God. It comes into creation, comes into existence out of his heart, that God creates. Therefore, if God's creating something right now, it didn't exist yesterday. So in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, day 1 didn't exist before day 2. Day 3 didn't exist before day... Did I say that right? Day 2 didn't exist before day 1. Day 3 didn't exist. Down here, all the days always existed, which is another absurd, contrary to biblical thought. Up here, we're saying, perhaps this God, all good things flow from him. He exists in the present with us, and he is creating the present for us to dwell with him. Perhaps we can see it. Maybe these aren't exactly the words, but this is the picture that is most fitting with Bible, present science, and logical philosophical thought. Finally, think of the examples where there's time changes in the Bible, like Joshua prayed that the sun would stand still, or Aaron's rod budded right in time. Okay, well, if we see time coming into existence as it flows from God, God can make time flow faster upon Aaron's rod, therefore it buds. Well, the people standing around, time is not acting upon on them as it is upon Aaron's rod, or upon the sun stands still. What happens? God can make the time flow toward the universe or solar system, can flow toward, like a wind flowing toward it at a different rate than it flows toward it Joshua while he was on the earth. But still, the whole solar system continued to exist where Joshua was. They still existed in the present. The rod that budded existed in the same present as the people standing around, but time acted on it differently. The only concept that you can develop from the Bible, science, or logical philosophy is that the present is all that exists. But because time is relative, it can move at different rates. So I would like to take this concept and go with you into all the other areas of theology and see the implications of it. The implications are profound. We can spend a lot more time. There's a lot of books written on God and time right now. This is a huge issue in the body of Christ because of how profound the implications are. If God is moving through time with us, is he in the present with us, it changes every day of your life what you believe. And again, I would come back to tell you that these issues are at the forefront of Christian thought right now. And if we want a Christianity that is free of Platonic thought, free of Platonism and the mythology of the ancient Greek worldview, we've got to focus on what does the Bible say. Get back to say, I'm going to start where the Bible starts in Genesis chapter 1. Apply to every area and it'll change. I hope you can study this issue more. I hope you have time to read through the book Father, Son, Theology. And in coming sessions, I hope you have time to watch them to see what the implications of this are. I'm going to close here. I just want to bless you in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. We're all trying our best to understand. We all want a Christianity that's vital and alive. We want it to believe. I'm going to try my best to separate Western Christianity from Western philosophy in order to offer you a view of God as Father, so you can see yourselves as sons and daughters of God. Okay, we're going to close with that. God bless you. Thank you for watching this session. Think about it. Pray about it. May God be with you. Amen.